Tales for Dark Nights.
The following performance is a second-round entry in the 2016 Evil Idol competition, and you, the listener, get to help decide who wins. Like what you hear? Click the thumbs up. Don't care for it? Click the thumbs down. Good luck to all of our contestants.
Little Timmy McGee. Written and performed by Charlie Davenport for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and the Evil Idol competition. Daddy! From the monitor on my nightstand, I could see my son staring expectantly into the camera above his crib. My wife rolled over next to me, turning away from the unwelcome light and noise. "Asked for by name," she mumbled, her voice weary and rough, from earlier turns soothing my boy's discomfort as his new teeth dug their way up to the surface. "Daddy!" I grumbled slightly as I rummaged through the fridge and then creaked along to Ethan's room, shaking off sleep as best I could. I inched his door open and was greeted with my own reflection. The crib sat in front of mirrored sliding doors, the sort of style choice that had gone out with the popcorn ceiling and wood paneling. "Daddy!" Ethan raised his arms towards me as I gathered him up. I tried the bottle and the teething ring, but he only turned his head back and forth in protest. I checked his diaper, but found it dry and clean. Finally having enough of my efforts, he let out an air raid siren of a wail. The wall between his bedroom and ours was thick, the house having stood since the early 1920s, but not so thick that my wife could remain sleeping through much more of that barrage. Listening to us read always had a calming effect on Ethan, and so I carried him to the living room, avoiding the toys spread out across the floor, and began to look over our small collection of children's books. We pretty much got all of them from the Lewis family next door. They'd been lucky and bought their house at the absolute bottom of the market, but with 2 kids, each one now needing their own room, it was time for them to move on. We picked up a load of things for Ethan that day. A radio flyer wagon, a rocking horse, and some stuffed animals. One was a pot-bellied wolf with a red checked shirt and huge felt triangles for teeth. "Oh, wait till you see what's in his belly," Jeff Lewis had said to me, indicating a Velcro line running down the toy's middle. I pried it apart with a loud shucking sound and found inside a tiny doll with horn-rimmed glasses, cray yarn for hair, and a remarkably calm face for an elderly woman that had been swallowed whole. "The Big Bad Wolf?" I asked. "Yeah. Came with one of the picture books we went for the girls. Creepy, right?" He gestured over to a knee-high pile of brightly colored books next to a pair of strollers his girls had long since stopped needing. "You guys, want any?" For the price of $1, we get a dozen classics. Peter Rabbit, The Cat in the Hat, and Goodnight Moon. All stories anyone can probably remember from their own childhood. But as I was arranging them on our shelves, I came across one with this plain blue cover that I didn't remember grabbing. There was no title or author listed, and when I opened it, I found that this book had no stamp on the inside of the cover proclaiming, "Property of Emily Lewis," as all the others had. Standing there, desperate for Ethan to stop crying, I decided to give it a try. "What you see in the mirror is not all there is," and little Timmy McGee looked at a face that was not quite his. I read out loud as I settled down on the couch. The line was odd, and I felt my nose scrunch up as though I smelled something foul, but Ethan gazed raptly at the picture open in front of him and drank deeply from his bottle. Seeing that this story held his interest, I kept going, finding myself sliding into that voice I always seemed to use when reading to him. "The little man who long ago should have been in bed or at least that's what Mom and Dad had said. Could not say exactly what was out of place, but knew in his heart of hearts that this was not his face. The illustration on the page showed a little boy wearing PJs the same blue as the front of the book. He was staring into a bathroom mirror, his face a quizzical blank. His reflection faced him, wearing the same expression. I looked again at the picture and thought that if there was a difference between the illustrations of Timmy and his reflection, I couldn't see it. The artist had drawn Timmy's mouth with a simple black line that pulled down to the right side of his face in a grimace. Sure, it was a crude drawing, intentionally so, but it conveyed pretty neatly that for a kid in footy pajamas, Timmy was certainly dealing with a puzzler. Daddy had looked him up and down, and was certain it was still his son's 2 feet that stood on the ground. Mommy said he shouldn't have a care, for it was without a doubt his dimpled cheeks puffing out the same air. I smiled at that, but as the previous page glided down, the next revealed Timmy, staring out at the reader with a deep and careworn expression lining his tiny little face. It might have been the early hour, or the fact that I hadn't gotten a solid night's sleep in a while, but it took me a minute of staring at the image before I could put my finger on what was wrong with it. On the page, 2 sets of eyes stared back at us. Timmy was facing out, looking right at us, and so was his reflection. I snapped the book shut and involuntarily flung it to the far end of the couch. After a moment, Ethan let out a confused and wounded wail, and I looked over towards the bedroom where my wife slept. Logic took over, and I retrieved the book, sitting back down, scolding myself for freaking out. Clearly, I'd let the sleep deprivation and the absolute stillness of my own house at 3 a.m. put my nerves on edge. I opened to what I thought was the same page, but Timmy was once again facing the mirror. It was only his twin, his reflection, that stared out at my son and me. I flipped back and forth, thinking that I must have seen it earlier or later in the story, but I didn't find it again. I was certain there had been the page with 2 identical faces drawn with flat, matching eyes, glaring up at us. Except, identical wasn't the right word. Timmy had looked blank, worn the face of somebody who had seen too much, but his reflection had been smiling with a wide, wild show of teeth. As my eyes searched through the pages for some explanation, Ethan's increasing irritation convinced me to begin reading again. The nose, yes, it was mostly the same, and he was certain his thoughts were rolling across the same little brain. His breath was no sweeter, his hair no neater. His eyes were still green and not blue, so what his parents had said had to be true. The next page had a reassured-looking Timmy leaning away from the mirror, the worry lines around his saucer-like eyes fading. He leaned back and let out a breath. He was not an Andy, a Gary, or a Seth. He was little Timmy McGee, just as he'd always be. That felt like a pretty good place to put an ending. All that was left was to drop in a moral about accepting yourself or something like that, and we'd be done with this. Timmy would crawl into bed, and then hopefully so would Ethan. It's good to be me, said the relieved little boy, who was still Timmy McGee. Then there came a tap. Sound against the glass, like a little slap. You're little Timmy McGee, age 3, and you are just like me. The teeth, the eyes. To look too closely is probably unwise. A voice like his cried from the mirror's other side. But Timmy did lean in, and saw a smile spread too thin, too wide. There were too many teeth, and it was all wrong inside. Truth be told, Out here it's ever so cold. We've been here quite a while. Please stay and give us a smile. We're full up to the brim and ready to come in and say hello to our little friend Tim. I stifled a yelp as there was a cold splash against my leg. The bottle had fallen from my son's grip, and icy milk leaked at the seams. He looked up at me with heavy-lidded eyes. He pressed his cheek against my chest and let out a deep, rattling sigh. My bleary vision took in the clock, and somehow 2 full hours had passed. A moment or two later he was deep asleep, and I was sliding the book back onto the shelf with an unmistakable sense of relief. I thought that I could go my whole life without ever knowing what became of Timmy McGee. I moved as quietly as I could to Ethan's room, keenly aware of every groan rising from the floorboards as I walked down the hallway, which felt like it was a mile long. I'd rarely been so tired. My eyelids kept sliding down in front of me during my trudge, and my thoughts moved like greasy sludge. I lowered him into his bed, and I heard a chime as if in my head. I looked into the mirror and with dawning fear realized I was not the only one here. I counted as the little one began to snore. In the mirror there was him, and me, and one more. In my mind, new ideas began to grind. These notions were not mine. They'd taken up rhythm, they'd taken on rhyme, and once again I heard the chime. I shook my head violently, trying to dislodge the strangeness of those foreign thoughts. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of Ethan's crib to keep from pitching over into it. "I'm just tired," I said, or "it's something I ate." Words to that effect. And I said them over and over again. Anything it took to make the world a rational place. I looked down through watery eyes at my son, who was sleeping peacefully with his thumb in his mouth, blissfully unaware anything at all had happened. With each repetition, my breathing slowed, and my vision cleared. And then there came a tap, a sound against the glass, like a little slap. I've been standing here for what feels like hours now. I tried calling out to my wife, hoping that the presence of another rational mind would show me something in this that was just too ridiculous to let it be real. But she never answered me. The sun's broken the horizon, and the light filtering in through the window is raising the temperature in the room a degree at a time. Still, I haven't heard her move. I can't think about that now, because when I'm not focusing on it, with all of my attention, that's when it moves. If I look away or blink or just let my mind wander at all, the thing wearing my face inches closer to us, to Ethan. Right now, its nose is pressed flat against the other side of the glass. A huge, broken grin creasing a face that's so much like mine. Why? Why is this happening? For what purpose? I don't know. How could I? I never finished the story in that damn blue book that even now sits on our shelf. That damn blue book, all by itself. I wish I knew how things turned out for Timmy McGee, because I think how it ended for him is how it'll end for me.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, don't forget to cast your vote for this contestant via a thumbs up or thumbs down vote. By doing so, you'll help us determine who will become the next permanent member of our voice acting team. At the close of voting on August 15th, based on your votes, the top 25 contestants will advance to the third round, which begins September 1st, based entirely on your votes. Thank you for voting and for helping to spread the word. You're listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm Steve Taylor, host of Chilling Tales, the podcast, encouraging you to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.